Que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
En las condiciones de la inmensa mayoría de los países de América Latina, no hay otro camino que la lucha armada. Y esa parece ser la situación también en muchos otros países de Asia y de África. Por lo general siempre el imperialismo cuenta con todos los medios, aliados con las oligarquías de cada uno de los países, para impedir el triunfo democrático de la revolución. Y tiene atado a los pueblos por una especie de nudo gordiano, que solo se puede quebrar mediante la lucha armada. Además, el camino de la lucha armada no es el camino que hayan escogido los revolucionarios, sino es el camino que los opresores le han impuesto a los pueblos. Y los pueblos entonces tienen dos alternativas: o doblegarse o luchar. Y luchar de la única forma en que pueden llegar a vencer al enemigo, que tienen más recursos económicos, infinitamente más, que tienen mucho más recursos técnicos. La guerrilla significa el empleo de los recursos del terreno y sobre todo el empleo de los recursos sociales de un pueblo para superar las ventajas que el enemigo posee en recursos técnicos y en recursos de tipo económico. El guerrillero, mediante una táctica hábil, muy flexible, mediante la explotación al máximo de todas las ventajas del terreno, mediante la movilización de los recursos sociales, es decir, de los sectores que son mayoritarios de la población, que son los sectores explotados, los sectores obreros y campesinos, y inspirado en una causa justa, inspirado en un factor moral muy poderoso, que los hace capaces de soportar privaciones, de adaptarse a las condiciones de vida más difíciles. Toma ese camino, que es el único camino para lograr conseguir un objetivo revolucionario. Eso fue lo que nosotros hicimos. Para poder hacer todo lo que hoy estamos haciendo en nuestro país, para poder llenar estas montañas de carreteras, para poder crear las condiciones de vida decorosas para el pueblo, para erradicar la ignorancia, para desarrollar en todos los órdenes a nuestro pueblo, fue necesario. Lo hicimos y ahora estamos haciendo esto.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 76, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. Today, the economics of imperialism. What is imperialism? Exposing its inner workings and how it colonizes and impacts working class and oppressed peoples all over the world. We're going to discuss how the dollar circulates and shifts world's wealth away from the global south and toward the imperial core nations like the US and the West, and also how the US, the UK, and Europe are able to freeze Russia's dollar assets and how foreign reserves work. And lastly, we're also going to discuss how the third world, the global south, is still to this day being colonized, extracted, its labor, people, resources, everything being extracted from the global south, sent to the West, commodified, sold back, exploited, and how the West, the imperial core, is able to afford social welfare programs. We hear a lot about the so-called Nordic socialist model and how that's based on imperialism. And joining me today is Comrade Tian Wang, a communist content creator who's been working with the Mango Press channel run by Millenial British Marxists. Tian arrived in England in 1993, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, one of the most catastrophic events in working class history. Tian grew up in the UK, but never saw himself as British. I had a similar experience being born and raised in the US. My family is from Honduras. I never identified with the so-called United States of America. So a lot in common there. Tian has kept his Chinese identity and still speaks, reads, and writes fluent Chinese Mandarin. Please subscribe to his channel. The link is in the description. How's it going, Tian?
It's going very well, thank you. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. We spoke briefly before, and we said we're going to do a collab, and here we are.
Thank you so much for joining me. Before we start, I want to ask you, I think it's really powerful that you're maintaining the traditions of your people, the Chinese people who have been resisting Western imperialism for centuries, if not millennia, and what has been your transformation like as a communist, as a Chinese communist, living in the imperial core? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Well, my backstory is, like I said, I arrived. My father was actually a teacher, a lecturer in Beijing People's University or Renmin University on politics and political science. And I don't know the ins and outs of that. I was very young at the time. I was about 3 at the time of the Tiananmen protests in that attempted color revolution in June 4th, 1989. Fortunately, it was stamped out for China. And but after I arrived in the UK, I was, of course, as a child, you would waver a little bit. I still saw myself as Chinese, but I sort of wavered, towards because at the time in the 90s, the vast majority of Chinese language material in the Western world, so certainly in the English speaking world, in the white Anglo world, was either from Taiwan or colonial Hong Kong. Remember, that was still colonial, the last years of colonial Hong Kong at the time. So I got quite a dose of brainwashing from the imperial core myself when I was younger. But as I grew older, as I grew older, as I grew wiser, as I grew more knowledgeable, I found myself going back to my roots, and eventually I identify myself as a Maoist, Marxist, and a Chinese communist.
Amazing. It's like a negation of the negation, coming back to your roots, coming back to your origins at a new and higher level. I think it's beautiful when people from the global south living in the imperial core nations return to their identity and the revolutionary struggles of their people, because it's so easy when you go to the belly of the beast, to Babylon, as we call it, to empire. It's so easy to just get absolved into the nonsense of propaganda. Here in the US, the American dream, having the US flag on your white picket fence front lawn. And it's always amazing to see people going back to their roots. I do want to give a shout out to Comrade Jared Ball. Peace, good people. Please check out Black Power Media, an amazing channel. I had Dr. Jared Ball on a few weeks ago. A really good dude, really knowledgeable guy who knows a lot about a variety of topics. Shout out to Ross from Ireland. Shout out to Itzel. Shout out to Big Teal. Everybody who's watching and listening. And it's really a pleasure having Tian on to discuss the economics of imperialism, because we hear a lot of liberals, radlibs, especially the Russophobic radlibs, who are throwing this term around a lot against Russia and also against China. And I think it's important to have a discussion about what the economic implications of imperialism really are, because a lot of times liberals think that imperialism is just whenever you have any sort of military presence outside of your country, but it's so much more than that. It involves the dollar, it involves sanctions, it involves the foreign reserves and all of these other systems. So what I do want to do before we get into talking about what exactly is imperialism, I do want to quickly read a section of Vladimir Lenin's pamphlet, very important pamphlet. I suggest everybody check this out. This is fundamental in understanding imperialism, what it is. It's a 1917 pamphlet called Imperialism, the High Stage of Capitalism, written at the height of the Russian Revolution against Western imperialism. And in this pamphlet, Lenin talks about the different characteristics of imperialism. I'm just going to quickly read a few paragraphs that I found were really compelling from this pamphlet that explains what it is, right? Because again, a lot of the liberals are appropriating this term. They're using it to mean something else that it's not. So I'm going to quickly read this. This is from section 7, Imperialism as a Special Stage of Capitalism. Quote, "We must now try to sum up, to draw together the threads of what has been said above on the subject of imperialism. Imperialism emerged as the development and direct continuation of the fundamental characteristics of capitalism in general. But capitalism only became capitalist imperialism at a definite and very high stage of its development, when certain of its fundamental characteristics began to change into their opposites, when the features of the epoch of transition from capitalism to a higher social and economic system had taken shape and revealed themselves in all spheres. Economically, the main thing in this process is the displacement of capitalist free competition by capitalist monopoly." Key word there, monopoly. Free competition is the basic feature of capitalism and of commodity production generally. Monopoly is the exact opposite of free competition. But we have seen the latter being transformed into monopoly before our eyes, creating large-scale industry and forcing out small industry, replacing large-scale by still larger-scale industry, and carrying concentration of production and capital to the point where it has grown out, out of it has grown and is growing monopoly, cartels, syndicates, and trusts, and merging with them, the capital of a dozen or so banks, which manipulate thousands of millions. At the same time, the monopolies, which have grown out of free competition, do not eliminate the latter, but exist above it and alongside it, and thereby give rise to a number of very acute, intense antagonisms, frictions, and conflicts. Monopoly is the transition from capitalism to a higher stage. And let me just quickly read these last two. If it were necessary to give the briefest possible definition of imperialism, we should have to say that imperialism is the monopoly stage of capitalism. Such a definition would include what is most important for, on the one hand, finance capital is the bank capital of a few very big monopolist banks, merged with the capital of the monopolist associations of industrialists. And on the other hand, the division of the world is the transition from a colonial policy, which has extended without hindrance to territories unseized by any capitalist power, to a colonial policy of monopolist possession of the territory of the world, which has been completely divided up. And here he gives 5 key elements of imperialism. 1, the concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high stage that it has created monopolies which play a decisive role in economic life. 2, the merging of bank capital with industrial capital and the creation, on the basis of this, quote, financial capital, of a financial oligarchy. 3, the export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities, acquires exceptional importance. 4. The formation of international monopolist capitalist associations which share among themselves. And 5. The territorial division of the whole world among the biggest capitalist powers is completed. Imperialism is capitalism at that stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. So that is Vladimir Lenin. We can't understand imperialism without reading that text, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Tian, what is your analysis of this? Maybe break this down for us in 2022. What does imperialism mean in 2022? And what are the underlying financial economic underpinnings of it?
Well, if you really want to look at the financial aspects of imperialism, one thing you've got to look at is you've got to follow the money. You've got to follow the money. And the most important thing is to understand which currency is the world's dominant currency today.
The dollar, of course.
It's the dollar. It's the dollar. Now, to be able to understand how this works, you need to do a lot of there's a lot of twists and turns. So I would really suggest, comrades, take a pen and pad and listen to it carefully. Ramiro, you got a pen and pad ready?
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what you need to understand is you need to start off by looking at, on the top of the page, you need to put the Federal Reserve, and next to it, put the U.S. Treasury, the Federal Treasury. And below it to one side, Wall Street. And below the Treasury, taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers. Now, you need to understand the relationship between these four parties. Is obviously taxpayers pay taxes to the Treasury. We understand that, but what the U.S. Treasury does is they cannot really issue dollars. Only the Federal Reserve can issue dollars. That's a central bank. Now, what the Treasury does is issue bonds, backed by U.S. taxpayers. And with these bonds, they sell to Wall Street. Now, Wall Street holding these bonds will then sell them to the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve basically goes into QE mode, quantitative easing, which is basically just not even printing dollars. They just type sums of numbers on screens. Yeah, that's what happened. They literally just type numbers on screens and use those numbers to buy in treasury bonds from Wall Street. Now, Wall Street holds on to this. Essentially, it's cash, but cash depreciates in value. So they've got to invest it somewhere. So Wall Street, then take an arrow from Wall Street down to the bottom of the page and write overseas. So Wall has to send this investment overseas somewhere where they can actually bring in profits for their shareholders. Now, meanwhile, Mr. Smith, just random name, has a business idea. It doesn't matter what business this is. Goes to his local bank for a loan. So Mr. Smith, arrow, local bank for a loan. Let's just call his currency Smith coin, just for argument's sake. Yeah. Now, obviously, he needs his currency in Smith coins, but then Smith, let's just call it Smith Bank, the local bank. Okay, so Smith local bank looks around, and because the dollar is the global reserve currency, dollar loans are the cheapest. So goes and finds a cheap loan. Now, obviously, Smithland uses Smith coins, so they can't spend the dollar. So the Smith local bank has to go to Smith Central Bank, take all these dollar loans to Smith Central Bank in exchange for Smith coins to give to Mr. Smith to use. However, here's where the catch comes in. Here's the catch. The catch is you got to pay it back with interest. You got to pay it back with interest, and usually is around about 10 years or so. And right now we're in such a phase now. The Federal Reserve raises interest, and with which they suck back. They demand their dollars to be paid back. But remember, every dollar printed or typed is actually a loan. So say for instance they only printed $10, they want $11 for 10% interest means they want $11 back, even though the $11 doesn't actually exist.
Right.
So statistically, it's not possible for everyone in the world to pay back their loans. Do you understand?
Of course.
It's not possible for everyone to pay back their loans. So somebody has to default. If it's not Mr. Smith, it's Mr. Jones. If it's not Mr. Jones, it's Mr. Harris. It's somebody. Somebody has to default. And when they default, their assets, it could be their house, it could be their land, it could be their business, is repossessed. And it's sent back to whatever local bank. And because the local bank owes Wall Street, it has to be sent off to, and Wall Street takes it over. And once there's a massive round of bankruptcies in that country, Wall Street then sweeps in and buys it all up, very, very cheaply buys it all up, and controls the economy of the said country, Smithland.
Oh.
Because it's not statistically possible for everyone to pay back their loans. Do you understand?
Of course. It's like I picture like a downward spiral of hell. That's why I like the term parasitism that Lenin uses, parasitic capitalism, where obviously we know that, as Marx explains in Capital, that exploitation is built into every transaction of capitalism through the extraction of surplus value. But imperialism is like capitalism on steroids, a parasitic version that even more so, like how you were explaining, you have a system where the world is in debt to itself and it can never pay it back. And somebody always ends up being effed up and left with a tab that they can never pay for value that was never even created. And I feel like for me, this is something that is so fundamentally evil. This is where I have a lot of agreements, even though I myself am not religious. I do have met a lot of Christian socialists in Latin America who view capitalism and the dollar as satanic or evil, because it's sort of like creating something out of nothing. You're trading commodities, you're doing all these transactions with value, like you said, that was just crunched up.
The Federal Reserve is doing is simply typing. It's just moving their fingertips around for a little bit. That's all they're doing. That's all the work they're doing.
Tell us a little bit about the Federal Reserve, because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, especially on the libertarian right. And I want to get your thoughts on what exactly, well, first of all, what is the Federal Reserve? And is there any room for communists and so-called libertarians to work together on combating the Federal Reserve System? Is there not? And just your thoughts on that, because I actually would like to know a little bit more about the Federal Reserve.
Right. The Federal Reserve was established in 1913 by signed into a decree as a presidential decree by the World War I American president Woodrow Wilson. Now, it was done over the Christmas holiday period, so that vast majority of the congressmen would not be around to veto it by the Wall Street bankers. Now, the Federal Reserve, it's called the Federal Reserve, but it's about as federal as FedEx. It's not actually owned by the U.S. national or federal treasury. Okay, the vast majority of certainly China's central bank, the Central People's Bank, is actually owned by the Chinese central government, the Central People's Government, and controlled and is controlled exclusively by the National Treasury. Not so here. The Federal Reserve is actually owned by American banks. The American banks are the shareholders. Well, obviously the Treasury does have a stake in it, but it doesn't have a controlling stake. It doesn't have a 95% stake in it, or 50, or even a 51% stake. It is a very, very small, comparatively very, very small stake in it. Not enough to actually be able to control it. So what this means is that the federal government can't physically pass fiscal policy that, even if they wanted to, that favors the people that actually elected the federal government, if you know what I mean. Even if they wanted to, not that they ever want to, because for obvious reasons. We've been through this on many, many episodes already. Yeah, so that's what it is. And if you can think of any American bank, Fargo and Wells, Stanley Morgan or JP Morgan Chase, whatever, you name it, all American banks, basically, virtually all American banks, however big, however small, have a stake in the Federal Reserve.
Wow, that's crazy. And it's interesting because in many ways, the Federal Reserve has become popularized, especially among the conspiracy theory crowd, where they'll say, "and the Fed," or they'll say, and a lot of attention gets away from capitalism as a system over to the Federal Reserve. So it's really interesting to learn about how the Federal Reserve works. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you,
it is part of the system. They are actually people. These are actually people we can work with. Socialists,
most definitely,
we can work with them.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, because I think a lot of times people on the left are mightier than thou or holier than thou, and they're like, I'll never work with anybody on the right who is this or that. And it's like, if we can agree on even fighting a system and fighting an element of the system like the Federal Reserve, I think that's definitely room for progress. I also wanted to ask you,
get plenty of friends, and then plenty of friends, few enemies.
Yep, exactly.
As many friends as possible, as few enemies as possible.
Exactly.
There's always things that we can agree on. Just work on what we can agree on. What we disagree on, we don't worry about for now. We worry about that later. But
just primary and secondary.
Yeah.
Exactly. What I want to do is I want to play a clip. This is a clip from the Wall Street Journal. Actually, this is about the dollar circulation and how the dollar circulates around the world and the power of the dollar. And I want to play this, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of the dollar, where you see the dollar going, and its role in imperialism.
The US dollar dominates global trade. In 2019, some 88% of international transactions involved US dollars. No other currencies came close. That gives the US extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything anywhere. Commodities like oil, gold, and coffee are all priced in dollars, regardless of where they come from. But this clout has long frustrated America's rivals, making them vulnerable to US trade sanctions. Here's how the global economy runs on the US dollar, and why some countries are developing alternative systems that could chip away at the dollar's dominance.
The dollar came to dominate trade after World War II. The US was the biggest economy in the world. Other countries were trying to rebuild, and the dollar, it was stable and plentiful.
In 1944, a conference of 44 nations agreed to peg their currencies to the US dollar. while the dollar itself was pegged to gold. As global trade grew, so did the use of the dollar to conduct the world's business. Even after the United States abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar remained the world's currency of choice.
The world has gotten used to doing business in dollars because it's just easier than doing business in any other currency. The dollar is incredibly liquid, meaning it's easy to buy and sell things all over the world. The US banking system is very efficient, and those things combine to make it cheaper for businesses to buy and sell in dollars.
Here's how a typical international transaction works in US dollars. A Canadian lumber company sells boards to a French home builder. The buyer's bank in France and the seller's bank in Canada settle the payment in dollars via correspondent banks in the United States. These correspondent banks have accounts at the United States Federal Reserve. The money is transferred seamlessly between these banks' Fed accounts because their status as correspondent banks means they are seen as safe counterparties. The United States says the use of these correspondent banks means every transaction technically touches US soil, giving it legal jurisdiction and compelling foreign countries to abide by its laws on money laundering and corruption.
After 9/11, the US used the power of the dollar to advance its foreign policy goals. The idea was to cut out the sources of funding for terror organizations.
The US used its control of the dollar to increase surveillance of global money flows and curb financing toward bad actors. It did this by imposing sanctions on its rivals. Under the system, if a business or country tries to trade with a sanctioned entity in dollars, the US has the power to cut off its access to US currency. But other countries have been building workarounds. Some EU countries opposed the US sanctions against Iran. These sanctions, put in place after the US withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal in 2018, included banning dollar transactions with Iranian banks. As a result, the EU is developing a euro-backed system that is designed to facilitate trade between Europe and Iran without sending money across borders.
The EU countries still in the Iran deal are trying to figure out a way to work around the US system so they can trade with Iran. Now that bothers the US, which is trying to exert maximum pressure on the Iranian economy.
India already has an alternative payment system in place that it's using to do business with Iran. According to a Wall Street Journal investigation, it's been used to facilitate transactions with sanctioned Iranian entities. But the United States is still exerting its influence in the Middle East through the power of the US dollar.
The dollar still dominates global trade. You can see that in the standoff between the US and Iraq. Iraq says they want to throw US troops out of the country. The US said, we'll cut you off from your dollars in the US system. But in the future, it's not clear how strong that threat will remain as other countries chip away at the power of the dollar.
If the power of the dollar falls, it could hurt the United States' ability to control the global trading system.
Straight from the horse's mouth, Wall Street Journal. Always interesting. Again, the political analysis kind of, it's funny to look at. Oh, nice pen, by the way. But it's interesting to talk about like the control of the dollar, right? How much international commerce is dominated and controlled by the dollar. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the dollar circulation, how that works internationally, and how it allows the West to transfer wealth from the global South in particular to the imperial core by using the dollar, and what is the future of the dollar?
Right. Right. The thing with the dollar, we've just described the global circulation itself earlier on, and it's let's not pretend otherwise. It's usually the poorer countries, the poorer peoples that are not able to pay back their loans. So those are the ones those are the nations, those are the peoples that are going to lose their that are going to lose their assets, and Indonesia is going to lose their timber or their rubber or whatever, or their palm oil plantations or whatever. Philippines are going to lose their whatever assets they have. It's usually the poorer countries that can't afford to pay off their loans. So it's the poorer countries that get hit the most. Now, the thing with foreign reserves is that people don't understand. People tend to think of foreign reserves as just a load of cash stashed away somewhere. Russia's foreign reserves are just a load of dollar or euro, $100 bills stashed away in a vault somewhere in Siberia. That is not the case. The vast majority, yes, they do have bills, but the vast majority of currency in this world today is electronic. So what this means is, yes, they do have some dollar bills, but the vast majority of their dollar reserves, you can think of them as the Russia's central bank. I'm just using Russia as an example here. Russia's central bank has a bank account with the Federal Reserve in DC, and their euro reserves is basically Russia's central bank, or whatever country Smithland's central bank has a bank account with in Frankfurt with the European Central. I believe it's in Frankfurt, or I can't remember if it's Frankfurt or Brussels, but with European Central Bank. That is how they are able to control your foreign reserves. That is how currency it works on trust. If you trust that this paper or these numbers on the screen has value, then it has value. If you don't trust it, then it doesn't have value. If I can give you $10 of Monopoly money, you're not going to trust it.
Yeah.
If I can give you a £10 bill, then you trust it because it's backed by the Bank of England, by the Queen, by whatever. That is how it works. That it just basically, it's a case of trust. How many people trust this currency? Now, but by weaponizing this this currency, here comes the weakness. Here comes the paradoxal. Paradoxically, the US dollar is powerful because it controls so much of global trade and the global and the vast majority of the globe's commodities are priced in dollars. But here comes the catch. If you use sanctions too much, people are going to lose trust. Yeah. For example, you've sanctioned Iran. Iran has lost trust, so they're moving on they've moved on to working with China, to working with India directly, rather than working with them through the dollar. And also, by the way, don't forget, if you use the dollar because you're holding bank accounts with the Federal Reserve, what this means is that they can actually monitor whatever, unless if it's cash. If it's cash, it's different. But if it's not, so long as it's not cash, the US can monitor any transaction you make between different countries or different accounts or different people or whatever. They can monitor it, and they can spy, and they can use this. This is a great source of intelligence for the US intelligence apparatus as well. Yeah. So that's another aspect of the full spectrum dominance, if you will. Yeah,
most definitely.
Where Pilgrim, we'll talk about another time.
One comment that I had, where Pilgrim said, I think the UK kind of got grandfathered in as an OG colonial power. Yes. That's a great point. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, not in China, but then there's this saying by not in China, but by one particular Chinese professor, Professor Jin Canrong, from the People's University or Renmin University. He says, the Anglo Five Eyes are like father and son. The Britain is the dad, US is the firstborn, the other three are younger kids, and Israel is America's love child with Jewish finance.
Most definitely.
And
that's exactly right.
Ireland, I would like to say Ireland is the very heavily abused mom. Ireland is their mom, but she's the very, very heavily abused mom. She is a victim of her circumstances. She is every bit a victim as everybody else. even though she is their mom.
No, it's true. And I think the crazy thing, I was reading about the city of London and the roots of the city of London in banking, and it's really fascinating as well. This is kind of where it gets into some of what some people would call conspiracy theories and stuff, but looking at the roots of it in the 1600s and following the Black Plague, and how so many of these different cartels from the Roman Empire that left ended up setting up shop in the city of London, and how it operates as its own entity separate from the rest of England. I find that really fascinating. And just the tactics that these banking families like the Rothschilds and others used, especially, I mean, dude, like China is a perfect example of how satanic and evil and vicious parasitic imperialism, capitalism is, in the sense that they literally use a drug like opium. They colonized India, where they can grow opium and poppy,
and starve
and then
Indian farmers as well in doing so, by depriving them of rice, of land to grow rice with.
And and it's like you're starving, you're colonizing people, you're starving them, you're extracting natural resources that they never use as drugs, perverting them into drugs, to then ship them to China to get millions of people hooked on drugs there, forcing them to buy your drugs so that you can steal all their shit.
Yeah, like, to top it all off, they create these caricatures, Fu Manchu or Ming the Merciless, and they make out that we're the drug dealers.
Right.
And the same with you people as well, you Latino people as well.
Right.
I mean,
they're saying we're the drug dealers.
And then exactly. And same with and sexualizing both ours and your women folk as well. I mean, the channel The Take has a very good analysis on this. But look at how Latino women folk and Asian women folk are portrayed in Hollywood. And then somehow we cannot allow China to rape our country.
That's a pretty good impression.
Mexicans are rapists. We all know what he means by Mexicans. He means Mexicans, Hondurans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Guatemalan, whatever, Colombians, whatever. Even those who don't speak Spanish, Brazilians, they're all Mexicans to him.
Right. And it's like it's portraying back what imperialism does onto oppressed communities in the global south. And it's just crazy to see how imperialism always does that. And I see that happening a lot now with the US portraying Russia and China as these evil empires and absolving itself of all of its sins. What I wanted to ask you, going into the topic about economic colonialism, tell us a little bit about how even to this day, imperialism is economically strangleholding the global south, and how do we as people from the global south, both in the imperial core but also in our home countries, fight back against this economic system?
Right. China, Cuba, both social. Well, some are socialist, some are not socialist. But the following list of countries that I'm going to mention have something in common. Some are socialist, some are not. China, People's Republic of China, DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Republic of Cuba, and Laos as well. Vietnam. These are socialist. Non-socialist include the Islamic Republic of Iran. And who else? Partially Venezuela as well. A socialist party is in charge, but it's not an actual socialist country, as in their assets are not actually owned by the nation. So
it's moving towards socialism.
Yeah, moving towards socialism. But it's not a full socialist country.
Right.
Yeah, we've got something in common. That is particularly China. We took back through armed struggle, as in the intro, Comrade Fidel Castro said, very, very, very profoundly. Obviously I don't speak Spanish, but I can read the subtitles. He says the imperialists and their compradors, they suck it's worse the effect, they suck the blood of our people and the people of Africa or of Asia, Africa or of Latin America or whatever, and through their compradors in whatever in their target countries, in the colonized countries. In China's case, that comprador was Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalist Party. We, under Chairman Mao, managed to kick them out of the vast majority of our country. Obviously, unfortunately, we couldn't liberate Taiwan. We still haven't been able to liberate Taiwan yet, but you know, that we'll come on to that another day. The point is, we took back all of our national assets. You know, we took back our farmland, we took back our mines, transportation networks. We took it all back, apart from those in Hong Kong and a small minority in Hong Kong and Taiwan. But Hong Kong is in the process of being taken back right now. Late, but better late than never. The vast majority. This happened in the 1979 revolution in Iran as well, non-socialist, but you know, it happened in Vietnam, a socialist nation, and Laos as well. DPRK unfortunately couldn't liberate the South, but at least in the northern half it was taken back. Cuba, it was taken back. But the vast majority of former colonies, of countries that were former colonies, actually, what they actually did, how they actually gained their independence, is they negotiated it away. A typical example is South Africa. They negotiated their independence. A typical example is South Africa and India. Again, India negotiated their independence. They didn't take it back with armed force. What this means is that they had to make sacrifices, because what you can't take back through military action on the battlefield, you certainly are not going to take back on the negotiation table. Their national assets have not been taken back. The gold mines, diamond mines, vastly fertile farmlands of South Africa are still owned by London and New York-based corporations. So Mandela and his ANC and his government and all his successors are not able to keep their word. They're not physically able. They haven't got the funds to be able to make good on all of their promises that Mandela made in 1994. And then they get blamed for corruption and this, that, the other. However, we in China, we took it all back, and we were able to go through the process of industrialization. That, I mean, socialist economics, that's another topic entirely. But we're talking about the rest of the global South. Another typical example you can is French colonies. Yes, colonies, not former colonies. I'm not even talking about the places like Réunion, the actual official colonies, or Guyana, or French Guiana, official French colonies, you know, that are still places that are still officially French colonies. No, I'm not talking about those. I am talking about places that use the currency known as this very weird currency known as the Central African dollar, or Central African franc, and West African franc. Essentially is one currency, but the African franc. What this means is that all of these countries have basically their central bank is not, yes, they do officially have central banks, but their central banks do not issue their own currency. It's the central bank in Paris that issues their currency. What this means is that they have excellent, extremely fertile black soil farmlands that they are not able to appropriate for themselves. They have excellent high quality oil, which they cannot extract and use for themselves. They have to extract it, send it to France cheaply, and then gets value added on through, you know, by processing, and it gets sold back at a very, very high marked up price. So therefore keeping these countries in desperate poverty despite having their official independence.
Yeah.
And then France has the goal to call this economic assistance.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Crazy.
This is how they, and America and the United States in Latin America as well. In your people, all of these excellent farmland, extremely fertile farmland that used to be rainforest, tropical rainforest. All of these plantations, these sugarcane plantations or whatever plantations, they are being kept by. They are owned all by American companies, American corporations.
Yeah.
And how they are able to afford food is that obviously this is why Venezuelans can't, a week's wages can't even buy 2 eggs. It's not because Maduro is an idiot. It's not because socialism is the socialist experiment failed completely, as I wouldn't call him an idiot. He's not an idiot. He knows full well what he's saying. In the intro is saying that's not the case. It is because all of their farmland are owned by, the vast majority of them, owned by American corporations, and these corporations buy these these resources off them, buy these farm produce off the Venezuelans, ship them to Miami for packaging and markup. If you package it, you brand it, you've marked up the price, and then sell back to the growers, those who put the work in growing the stuff. Just because you've packaged it, just because you've put it in a package, just because you stuck a label on it, it gets marked up, and the poor soul that works tirelessly on the plantation in Venezuela have to buy it back at a marked up price because he literally has no choice. This is economic imperialism. This is how things work. This is how the Americans, or not the United States specifically, but the Europeans are able to afford social welfare, how they're able to afford, and they can claim, and they have the goal to claim, we're more socialist than China. We've got social welfare.
Right.
You don't. Yeah. Ha ha ha. We're more socialist than you. You're not socialist. Yeah, this is how they're able to afford it. It's and even so, it's the big corporations that scam off the cream, that cut the vast majority of it, and whatever leftovers they get, they send off to the plebs on the street, and they give to the plebs on the street to keep them quiet, in the form of social welfare, in the form of free healthcare, in the form of this, that, the other, and Americans don't even get free healthcare.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy.
So this is how things work. Now, there is a weakness to this argument, in the sense that places like Germany, Scandinavia, they don't have any colonies in the third world. You might ask, well, this is something else. They depend on this thing called technological dominance. How Wall Street, how the
Buffy, that's pretty funny. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Need Buffy to take care of these economic vampires. I'm gonna dress up like Buffy.
Yeah, I remember Buffy. I'm old enough to remember Buffy. Yeah, those were the days. Anyway, how they're able to afford them? Well, that's because how the world economic system is developed is established to this day, and this will play a part later in understanding how we can break it. Now, the world economic system, you understand the thing about how familiar are you with the concept of economic complexity?
Why don't you explain that a little bit? Because I myself am not.
Means that what economic complexity means is that whatever products a country is able to produce, how unique it is. For example, say, I don't know, a lump of iron or rock is the same everywhere. A lot of countries can produce it, but the fewer countries are able to produce a certain product. For instance, I don't know, Boeing 747. There's only one, country. There's only a few other types of aircraft around that are equivalent to it. The fewer the countries that are able to produce said item, the more complex it is, which means that these countries are able to mark up their technologies to as high as they want, because you can't get it elsewhere. Yeah, that is economic complexity. And those who do not have any, no longer have any colonies, such as Germany, such as Scandinavia, they hold on to certain technologies, that are given, usually, given to them by either, they developed it themselves, or are given to them through by Americans or whatever, or through working with American or German or whatever firms. They mark up their they mark up their prices through technological patents. And those who with technological patents, those countries with the larger number of technological patents that are out there in the market, take the biggest slice of the world's economic cake, which is how the global economy functions. Which means that the manufacturing nations such as China and to a lesser extent Vietnam have to dig deeper into the resource, those who the resource producing nations, into their pockets as well, to be able to afford to live. Yeah, this is how, and this is how, this is how the world, this is how this works, is through technological domination, dollar domination. So the American empire works on technological domination and dollar domination. And with the dollar domination and technological domination comes military domination. And because to prevent Americans from being the ones that default, the American armed forces goes all over the world, causing trouble, causing problems, causing strife, to cause capital flight, to drive the idea is to drive the money, the wealth of the world to the one place that the US armed forces will not attack, which is the United States itself. So that's where that is the arm of the military industrial complex. So you've got the and then you've got the resource, so the big oil, big resource, big pharmaceuticals or whatever, those big oil, which and those agricultural tech giants, resource barons, basically controlling the global south, the economic assets of the global south. You've got the financial barons controlling Wall Street and the dollar circulation, and you've got the military industrial complex controlling the military arm of the industrial of the American imperialism, the military wing of American imperialism, and then finally you've got the media. Because you're able to afford the military strength, because you've got the economic strength, you can then hire your best writers, your best broadcasters, the world's best broadcasters, best writers to be able to make this polished image of the American dream, or the world policeman, or Captain America, or whatever, whatever America, the world policeman fighting for justice all over the world to polish up the image.
Yeah.
This is the four main pillars of American imperialism in a nutshell.
Wow. I think that's such a great breakdown. And I like the fact that you include these different elements because they all feed into each other. In terms of the media role, I think that's such a great example because one of the biggest things that we see, in particular in Latin America and the Caribbean, is when you go to Latin American countries. I've been to many Latin American countries, and it's very similar for those of you watching and listening who have been to Latin American countries, and I'm sure it's the same in other countries as well in the Global South, that when you go and you visit friends or family, they don't want to take you to the traditional shops where they sell traditional food on the street or whatever it is. They want to take you to the Western franchises, to McDonald's, to Burger King, to all of the franchises that are failing in the US or in the UK and Europe. They send down to the Global South. They sell this image of the American dream. I feel more American wearing these Abercrombie and Fitch shirts, eating a burger at Chili's, as opposed to having noodles on the corner shop in my traditional garb. So they fuck with our psyche, they fuck with our emotions, our images. And Hollywood, as where Pogram said, Hollywood plays its part selling, right? You have to sell and market and brand this economic imperialism, and it's so crazy to see that. Another thing that I wanted to mention that you touched on earlier is like how it comes full circle. So, for example, I grew up in New York, right? And I know in the UK, you guys probably also have a lot of migrants from Bangladesh and Pakistan.
Oh, yes.
And there's a lot of textile, and China and India. There are a lot of textile traditions in South Asia in particular, and East Asia as well. But in Bangladesh, I grew up with a lot of friends who are from Bangladesh that had one of the earliest textile industries producing clothing. And so I grew up with a lot of friends from Bangladesh. And basically, one year I went to Bangladesh for a communist union conference in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. And I actually got a chance to meet some of the workers organizing the sweatshops in Bangladesh. And I got a chance to see the H&M sweatshops, which are disgusting in Bangladesh. Women working 15 hours a day, 17 hours a day.
Yeah, and they got
conditions.
A goal to accuse China of running Uyghur.
Right. Yeah.
They're the ones who run sweatshops.
Right, exactly. Like they're doing it, and then they'll accuse China and other countries of doing what they're doing. And so I got to.
Out of all the Central Asian Turkic peoples, the Uyghurs are the by far and away the wealthiest, thanks to China.
Right. Exactly. No, and so I when I was in Bangladesh, I got a chance to see the sweatshops, and I'm like, wow, like I'm seeing these Bengali women producing H&M shirts that were being shipped to the U.S. for sale, and so. When I returned to the U.S., I passed by an H&M store, and I found out that one of my friends who I went to high school with, who's from Bangladesh, was working there as a sales rep. So you have somebody who, he's from Bangladesh, his family probably left because U.S. companies like H&M brought down the wages so low so that people work in sweatshops like H&M to produce these commodities with literally just fucking 2 letters, H&M, with textiles produced from Bangladesh. And now you have a migrant in the imperial core from that nation selling that very same product stolen from his natural homeland. And to me, it's just crazy, and with China, there's so many countless examples, with tea in particular, with so many products, that we can talk about. But just seeing how it comes full circle is insane to me.
Yeah, but this is, like we said, but now we need to talk about how we can fight back against it.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Now, an idea that that I've got in how we can of how we can fight back against this is we've already said the dollar is being weaponized, and every time the dollar's been weaponized, it's been weakened. Its long-term health is being weakened. Now we've got the Russians who used to be up there as a superpower. but when Russia was controlled the Soviet Union, was the leading, when Russia was the leading player in the Soviet Union, and used to be a superpower, but now has been reduced to a resource selling nation. But with these sanctions against Russia, the Russians are now only accepting rubles for their resources. Now, this is a potential idea that we can work with. That we can, if Russia only accepts rubles, we in the global South, plus Russia and Belarus and Serbia, or whatever other the first world nations wants to, or second world nations want to defect to our side, we can form a separate currency system of our own. Let's call it the euro, and the strongest economy in the global South is communist China.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that I've got is that we can potentially form a new economic system with, of the global South based around the Chinese economy, and we can possibly set up a new currency. Let's just call it the Eurasian yuan, for argument's sake. It's not an official name, but it's just a name I've just come up with. A Eurasian yuan as a new currency that we can work with to replace the dollar. If India joins in, if Pakistan joins in, if Bangladesh joins in, and sub-Saharan Africa, and even Saharan Africa, and the Arab world, Persia, Iran joins in, Russia joins in, and Latin America joins in, we can then form a sort of a coalition, a union, a trade union, if you will, a trade union of nations that sell resources, that says, no, you will not buy our resources at prices that you set. We will set the price. If you, it doesn't matter if you want to go elsewhere. You want to go to, say, I don't know, you want to, Saudi Arabia says, Saudi Arabia's, okay, we want to go to Saudi Arabia. Well, let's buy your oil for this price. No. We want it at this price. You want to go to Iran? You want to go to Iran? You go to Iran, you get the same price. You want to go elsewhere, you get the same price. You want resources, you have to get it at this price. The global South can then come together and basically reorganize the cake of the world economy and recut and redistribute. Yes, a new trading bloc without the USD. That's exactly what I'm talking about. A new trading bloc without the USD. Say, I don't know, if you want to trade with us, you have to reduce your markups, your technology patent markups. Otherwise, you will not get the resources needed to market your goods. And this will be a big coalition comprising 85% of the world's population that stands up and says no to the imperialist core.
Wow. Powerful. Amazing.
And to this, I'd like to read a poem by Tian Wang. When he was making the Long March, when he was during the Long March, he marched past the...
By the way, if Tian disappears or suddenly suicides himself, it is not true. We know the international mafia hitmen. Once you start talking about creating a non-US dollar currency, they'll start coming after you. So he's totally fine. He's happy. He did not suicide himself. Just as a record,
Yeah. Tian Wang wrote this poem once when he saw the Kunlun mountain in the distance during the Long March. I have translated it myself. This is my translation. I'm going to read it in English. Acrosseth the air, aboveth in the azure, the Kunlun peaks snow white. Thou hadst seen the fairest of man and nature, 3,000,000 jade dragons in flight, freezing the heavens up in the bone-chilling height. In summer days, to thy melting snow, thy torrents rage and flow, where thou hadst sent many a man to sleep tight with the fishes and turtles down below. From whom has judgment passed to the evil and the good? In these thousands of autumns you've stood. Today to Kunlun I saith no. Needless is thine height, nor is all thine snow. Could the celestial sword in all its might cleave thee in three at my behest, sendeth to the Occident thine crest, giveth to Mundus Novus thine breast, and keepeth in the Orient the rest, peace would prevail acrosseth all mankind, with the same warmth and cold, with none left behind.
Wow, beautiful. Mao Zedong, long live Chairman Mao. People forget that he was a brilliant poet.
He was a brilliant poet, and this is my translation.
Amazing work, man. I really admire the fact that you're maintaining your people's language, heritage, poetry, and also from a revolutionary perspective as well, because sometimes the liberals kind of dominate that space, but you're maintaining the revolutionary nature of Chinese culture, and it's something amazing. I do have to head out, but Tian, is there any last comments or anything you want to mention before we head out?
One last comment is,
yeah,
may the global South prevail, and may the global South cleave the global North in three, and have peace, and have the same warmth and cold throughout the world, with none left behind.
Beautiful. Definitely would love to have you back on, man. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you. Please subscribe to
so many other things we can talk about. There's so many. I mean, there's how the propaganda network. That's a whole can of worms in itself. The military industrial. That's a whole can of worms in itself. There's so many different things we can talk about.
Most definitely, comrade.
Chinese Revolution. That's another knowledge module in itself.
We got to do an episode on that, man. That'd be amazing. Because I went to China in 2019, and so I got a lot to share with you about my experience there. Amazing. Me and my girlfriend were ready to move there, so we wanted to stay, but we feel it's important to share the truth about how amazing China is. Thank you so much, Comrade Tian. Please subscribe to his channel. The link is in the description.
Tian Wong is not my real name. It's my nom de guerre. Okay, just so people know. But follow my channel.
He did not kill himself.
But I will be updating. But I will be updating. I've gotten lazy, but I will be updating so long as you view my stuff.
No worries, man. No worries. Thank you so much for joining me. Tian is a communist content creator who's been working with the Mango Press channel run by Millennial British Marxists, based in the UK, Chinese revolutionary. Again, please subscribe to his channel. Peace out, everybody. Thank you for watching and listening. Have a great weekend. Take care, brother. I'll talk to you soon, man. Peace. Take care.
Let's understand clearly when we talk about capitalism, who are the capitalists? If we understand that there are only a few people who own and control the means of production in the society, then we begin to understand that there are a few capitalists. And these capitalists exploit everybody because everybody works for them. Everybody sells their labor to them. It is by selling your labor to a capitalist that he's really able to exploit you. The sole motivating force in a capitalist society is profit. Profit. That is the sole motivating force. Profit. Get money. Get it. Get it as fast as you can. Get it any way you can, but get it. Just get it. Just get it. We are imbued with the philosophy of capitalism, and sometimes we don't even recognize it. Thus you find brothers and sisters even selling dope to their brothers and sisters to make money. Again, because we're imbued with the philosophy of get some money. Ain't nothing wrong to kill for money. Hell, your country is napalming for money. You can certainly kill for some money. All right, just get it. Just get it. It's the overall philosophy. When we talk about revolution, we must talk about changing values. We must talk about changing values, and we must understand these values.